What I want to know is how does one get involved in doing rock work as a woman? Do you really, really want to know? Or do you just want the rehearsed response that I always give? What would happen if we chose to really tell the truth about ourselves? Like if we really, really just told the real truth of our lives. I'm not saying that it's true. I'm saying that it's my truth.
You're listening to Hammered.
I daydreamed a lot as a kid, and I had this one daydream. And I remember walking up and down the streets. I grew up in suburbia in metro Atlanta, but we had moved out to a brick ranch house when I was about 5 years old, and grew up in a regular kind of neighborhood, middle class America. And I remember, though, I would walk to see friends at their houses or whatever, but I would always have this daydream of like an A-frame cabin. And A-frame cabin had big glass windows in the front, and inside was a big fireplace with a roaring fire. And I would see myself on a couch or like a sofa with like a glass of wine or champagne, and I would be with like a female. And these thoughts would kind of flicker in my mind, and then I would get really nervous and kind of scared about these thoughts, and so I would kind of shut it down. I didn't really feel like a girl, and I didn't really feel like a boy. I didn't have any kind of like attachment to my gender or any of that. It was just something that I sort of shrugged off, and those things weren't talked about. I remember telling my mom, she'd be like cooking supper or be in the kitchen a lot, and I'd sit up at the counter and kind of watch her, and I remember sometimes feeling sorry for her, like she has to go to work every day and come home and do all this for us. And my dad was quiet and sulky and moody, and I think she was kind of dancing around that situation. But I remember one time I looked at her over the counter, and she was like putting something in a skillet, and I said, "Mama, when I grow up, I'm going to come back and get you, and I'm going to have a Jeep, and I'm going to take you across Europe, and we'll backpack." And I just had this whole fantasy of how I was going to come get her and take her away and go see the world. And she'd laugh and she'd say, "Well, more power to you, honey." And then I would say, "And I'm not going to ever get married." And she goes, "Oh, don't ever do that." And she'd sort of laugh. And so it was kind of an ongoing joke that we had about not getting married. And there was never really a huge game plan of what I was going to be when I grow up. I guess I just kind of grew up thinking that life would come to me and present itself, and that's how I would choose to live it. There was never really any critical thinking or deep thinking about how our lives unfold. You read history books, you see movies, you see all these other things and ways of being, but I never applied it to myself. So coming back from college was a huge sort of like unexpected whirlwind. And I made a horrible choice by leaving college with a semester left to graduate. And I returned back to Atlanta, and my parents had divorced, and my father told me I could move in with him, and I did. And he lived in a small apartment. And so I moved back in, and he was like, well, you got to get a job. You can't just, be in here and live here and not get a job. And I was like, I'm going to get a job. Don't worry. And I just felt a lot of pressure from the second I got back to hurry up and get a job, because my family was very salt of the earth, working hard working family. And my dad worked for Kodak. He'd been there since he was right out of the army, and everybody worked and work. And, I often got accused of being a workaholic through the years, and later in life, landed in therapy lady's office, and she confronted me with my work addiction. And I just remember saying, I'm not addicted to work. I mean, I hate work. We all have to work. It's just what we have to do. And that's a whole nother kettle of fish. But after I returned back to Atlanta, and the parents had divorced, and I had made this choice because I had met this girl in college, and, I just would get enamored with a person's attention toward me, and I would follow that person wherever, and I would do whatever. And this started a whole series of codependent choices and basing decisions on somebody else's needs and wants and thoughts, and putting my own self on a back burner because basically I didn't have any worth. I didn't know that. I just thought I was just going with what somebody else chose because they knew better than I did. I didn't trust my own instincts, and I didn't trust my own choices. The fucking bottom line is I wanted somebody to love me. I just wanted somebody to love me. And I followed this person back to Atlanta, and by the time I had come back, I had really pretty much crossed the line of alcoholism and drug addiction, cocaine basically, and got back. And this particular person, she moved in with her parents who were living across town in Atlanta, and they were kind of well-to-do, and so she was going to live with them, and I was going to live with my daddy, and we were going to try to have this relationship. And throwing in the towel on the college thing, I had this huge grandiose idea that I would move back to Atlanta, and I'd go down to Georgia State and finish up my degree, and everything would be great, and move on. And I was getting a degree in PE, physical education, because that's what you become when you're an athlete and you're female from the 70s. You either become a PE teacher or some kind of teacher. I mean, I just I never put a whole lot of thought into it. I never had anybody really guide me or ask me. Nobody ever asked. It was just like an assumption. Oh, well, she's big and she plays sports, so she'll probably do something to do with that. She'll coach. But I got back, and, Daddy was real adamant about, you better hurry up and get a job. And he suggested the Big Star grocery store. And I was like, ugh. So I went, because he suggested it, so that's where I went. I went down to the Big Star, and I went in, applied for the job, and they hired me, and we went into this office, and they handed me this red polyester outfit. It was in plastic packaging, and they said, what size do you wear? And I was like, I don't know. And I said, just give me extra large. And I really wasn't extra large. Everything I chose was always larger than I was, because I had such a skewed idea of how big I was. I was 5'11", and I weighed about 165, and I had always been very fit, but I always heard how big I was and tall, and you're big boned, you got big bones. And my grandmother, my Nanny Haynie, used to call me big old girl when I was like a kid. She'd go, come here, big old girl, and she'd pat me on the back real hard. And I remember getting this stupid looking outfit at the Big Star grocery store, and the minute I looked at it, I was like, I just don't know if I can wear this. But I knew I needed the job just to shut my dad up and satisfy him because he's going to let me live there and sleep on the couch. And so I went ahead and I got the job, and they put me in the cheese shop, and it was like a cubicle in the middle of the grocery store. And the outfit was like these stretch red pants, and they were huge. They were like really baggy. There was no way to hold them up really. And then this kind of tunic top that went down over it, and it zipped up. It had like a collar and short sleeves, and then a little hat, like one of those kind of paper hats like you see in some kind of diner or something. And that was debilitating wearing that outfit, but I went ahead and did it, and they started training me in the cheese shop, and they said, you're going to have to make pizzas. And so I would stand there and make these homemade pizzas, and they'd tell me the ingredients and show me how to do it. And of course I would put overkill of the ingredients because I thought, I'm not going to just give them a little bit of this, that, or the other. And I would kind of pile everything on. So I kind of got reprimanded about that, but I was just trying to make people happy. Once again, everything I did was to get approval. I didn't even know the fucking customers, but I'm already getting approval from them, because if they'd say, hey, can you make me a pizza fresh? I'd be like, sure. And they'd be watching me make it, and I would pile the shit on just to make them happy. And getting that kind of like accolade, any little accolade of you're okay. Oh, thanks so much. That's great. Was setting me up. There is an art form. There is a pure art form in getting people to accept you and getting people to be drawn to you and love you and come back to you. And I did not know how charisma or any of these things worked. I didn't know that I had any of that in me. I thought I was just a shy, fat, stupid kind of girl that made a bad decision, and now I'm being punished by God to sit here in this cheese shop and make fucking pizzas for people. One day I saw this girl come in the store from my high school, and I had a crush on her. She, I think, was like in the 9th grade, and I was in the 10th grade or something like that. But when I saw her come through that grocery store, I took off to the back of the store. And I thought, I cannot be seen in this outfit. My ego was just crushed. And so I took off to the back, and I hid until I saw her leave the store. And that was it. That was it. I can't do this. I've got to change careers. I've got to change jobs. I can't be seen in the outfit. It was just too much. So I went and I bought the Atlanta paper, and I opened it up, and right on the right-hand side, right smack in the middle of the want ads, was this ad, and it's in big letters said, "Need cash fast?" And it had an address. It said, "Must possess a driver's license." And it gave this address and apply in person. And I took my pen and I just circled it. I thought, well, I do need cash fast. And so the next day I got up and I thought, well, I'll just drive and go find this place. And so I went down I-85 in Atlanta, and it was right off Pleasantdale Road, right before the Spaghetti Junction, which was a new intersection. And I got off at the exit, and I saw this kind of, looked like an abandoned gas station, and I saw the address number on this building. There was really nothing there. There was this huge, big, silver-looking structure in the parking lot that looked like a big rectangular kind of box. And then there were all these kind of pressure-treated posts coming up out of the ground in front of each parking space. And all the pressure-treated posts had like an electrical outlet on them. And it kind of looked like something like you'd see like at a campground. And I couldn't figure out why there were all those posts, but no cars or anything. I think there was one kind of beat up old Grand Prix over to the side of the building. Well, I pulled right up, and I had a little 1975 Toyota Celica. And my daddy told me if I'd get me a basketball scholarship that he'd help me get that car. And so that had happened. And so I really liked this little car. It was cool. Nobody back then had a Japanese vehicle. Most things were American. And so I felt like I was a little bit unique because I had this 75 Celica. It was two-tone. It was white. It had a tan top and it had tan interior. And it had an 8-track Pioneer tape player, and I thought I was pretty cool with all that. But I drove up and I parked and I went to the door, and I thought, I bet you this door's not even open, because it really looked abandoned. And when I opened the door, it was open, and I walked in. The whole front of the building was glass. Like I said, it was like an old gas station. And I walk in, and it's this concrete floor, and I'm kind of looking around, and there's a metal chair over to the right beside a door, like an old, kind of panely door. And all the walls were sort of wooden panel. And then I look, and there's that, like a window, like a bank teller window, but it had bulletproof glass. I think it was bulletproof glass, and a hole, to talk through. And like a little shelf, like a little ledge. I guess if you could put your arms on it, you could, and lean in and talk to somebody. And I look, and there was this young woman, and she saw me come in, and she kind of came over to that hole, and she said, "Are you here for an application?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "All right, hold on a minute." And so she comes over, and she puts a clipboard and puts it into a one of those things like a drawer that passes through. And so I get the clipboard, and she said, "You can go over there and sit in that chair and fill out the application." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "My name's Chris." And I said, "Well, my name's Jill." And she was kind of an attractive younger woman. I'd say maybe she was, maybe 30. And she kind of reminded me of Stevie Nicks. She had kind of a Stevie Nicks sort of shag haircut, and she had brown eyes, and she was pretty. And she was kind of rough around the edges, but she was serious. She wasn't super friendly. She didn't seem Southern to me. She kind of had sort of a little bit of a Northern accent, but it wasn't really northerny. It was more something I'd never heard. But I go over, and the application was very vague, and it was just kind of a generic. It didn't have a company name on it. It didn't have anything. It was just like social security number and your address and phone number, and just really basic. And I filled it out, and I took it back over and put it back in the little drawer, and she pushed a button. She got it out. She goes, "You have a driver's license?" And I said, "Yes." She goes, "Let me have it." And she took my driver's license, and she went back and she made a copy of it. And then she brought it back, and I just kind of stood there, and she said, "You can wait over there in that chair, and somebody will be with you in a little while." And so I went over, and I sat in the middle chair, and I waited, and I kept looking around, and there was nobody. And I thought, well, there's not even cars. Like, who's coming to get me, and what is this place? And I didn't have any nerve to say, "Hey, what's this business?" Like, I didn't know that I was allowed to ask questions. I was too maybe browbeaten. I don't even know if that's a way to term it, but I didn't have the confidence because, see, I didn't want to look stupid. I didn't want to look like I didn't know. I want to act like I already know everything, and that way I feel safe and secure. If you just walk around like, "Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, fine, that's good," then, people will think that you know. And so I sat over in that chair, probably a half hour went by, and I was getting pretty antsy. Like, I feel like I just want to leave. And at one point, I kept thinking, okay, 5 more minutes and I'm going to leave. In 5 more minutes, if somebody is not here, I'm just going to sneak out. She'll never even see me. I'm just going to leave. What would have happened if I would have left? And I look at those forks in the road, because there was a fork right there. There was a fork in the road of, Jill, you can get up and leave. Maybe I will. Maybe I should. Maybe I will. Okay, was that little voice, was that something tried to guide me? Or was the other part of me, no, just they told you to wait. You just wait here. You better just wait here. That fork in the road, that particular fork in the road was so important and so huge. But when you don't know what voice to listen to, you just kind of go, well, I'll do what I'm told. I'll do what I'm told because I don't trust myself. So far, I haven't made real great choices. Now, up until college, throughout my high school days, I had lived sort of a double life because I was already drinking and using and doing all kinds of shit that my parents never knew about. But that's what teenagers do. That's what kids do. Everything in my life so far had been, that's what everybody else does. I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary. Well, about that time, with all this shit going on in my head, this van comes wheeling into the parking lot of this place. It was a kind of a white Chevy van, and it, I'm exaggerating, but it almost looked like it came in on 2 wheels on its side. It was like, it comes in, comes right up to the front and slams on the brakes. And I sort of got this blurry sort of vision of, there were all these like decals on the van and had a lot of windows all the way around it. And it had like a bunch of clowns and looked like sayings and little pictures. And then I saw this little bell on top and I was like, what is that? And this guy comes around, got out, and he came in real fast and opens the door. And I will never forget this guy as long as I live. And he walks through the door, and he had this kind of shaggy brown hair, and he had on corduroy pants, and he was kind of disheveled, but he had this kind of crooked smile, and he had like an arched eyebrow, and he had this kind of hook nose and big feet. His feet were almost like his shoes almost looked like clown shoes. And he comes in, he looks over at me, and he goes, "Are you the new trainee?" And I go, I think. He goes, "What's your name?" And I said, "Jill." "Jill who?" And I said, "Jill Haynie." He goes, "Well, I'm Bill." And he came over and he shook my hand, like all official, which was kind of weird because it kind of didn't go with the way he looked. And he said, "Hang on a minute." And he goes over to the window and he's talking to the Stevie Nicks girl through the window and blah, blah, blah. They're kind of talking. And he comes back and he goes, "Well, are you ready to go?" And I said, "Where are we going?" And he goes, "We're going to go out and do a route that will be your potential route if you choose to take this job." And I'm looking out there and I'm like, that's a fucking ice cream truck. And so he said, "Come on, grab that chair and bring it with you." And so I fold up the metal chair and I walk out and I get into this van. There's no front seat. There's no passenger seat. There's the driving seat. And so I put the metal chair into this empty floor and there's no seat belt. And he said, "All right, well, here we go." And off I go. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like it's 10:30 in the morning. I haven't had anything to eat. I don't have any money. Where are we going? And how long is this going to take? But see, I couldn't ask any of those questions, so I didn't. I just went with him. And he's kind of talking, and here we go. And I'm thinking, who in the hell is going to buy ice cream like in the morning, like at 10:30? And he says, the first place we're going to go, we're going to hit the office parks. And I'm like, office parks? And so we go up Jimmy Carter Boulevard. And now at this time, it's around early 1980s. And there's a lot of growth in Atlanta. And there's a lot of businesses, a lot of corporations and things like that. So he turns into this particular office park. And he starts ringing the bell. And the bell on top of the roof had this rope that came down through the ceiling and was like hanging there. And it had a couple of knots in the rope. And he would grab the rope and he would ding-da-ding, ding-da-ding, ding, ding-da-ding, ding. He'd ring this bell and then he'd turn around and start coming back kind of slow. Well, lo and behold, people would start coming out of these buildings, ladies wearing dresses and guys in suits and warehouse people and all kinds of people working in these office parks. And he said, yeah, you have to really aggressively ring the bell when you enter, a office park or a neighborhood or whatever. If you ring the bell real loud, that gets their attention and that gives them time to get their money and get their shit together. And then you come back through really slow. And so we're kind of creeping through there and people start coming out and they're like waving their dollar like, hey, and I can tell he kind of has a rapport with these people and they start buying these ice creams and, buying ice cream sandwiches and tango bars, which are like vanilla creamsicles and Eskimo pies and fudgesicles and push-ups and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, this is real strange to me that people are buying, but I guess it's like a break time, like a morning break time. Why not eat sugar? There was a whole lot of awareness at that time about health and wellness and things like that. So I guess it was kind of like in high school when we would have our break at 10 o'clock in the morning, they'd serve us like, Little Debbie and Hostess. I remember always getting those Suzy Q's, those big old chocolate and cream-filled pastry cakes in a cellophane package and eating the whole thing and then about falling asleep in the next class. But there was no awareness around sugar and sugar addiction and whatever. We're doing this and it was just strange. And the whole time I'm thinking, I'm not going to be able to do this. Like, I'll ride around with him and I'll just get through this day, but there's no way that I could do this. And so, he's telling me things along the way. And then finally, it seems like forever, about 4 o'clock, we get out of these office parks and he looks over at me and he goes, now we go for the real money. And I'm like, well, where are we going? He goes, we're going to hit the residential. And I'm thinking we're going to go like into like a neighborhood or something. And he goes, we're going to hit the trailer parks. And I went, the trailer parks? He goes, yeah. And so we went over Buford Highway in Doraville. Well, what was odd was my first home was in Doraville, Georgia. I was born downtown Atlanta at Georgia Baptist Hospital, but my parents, their first house was on Buford Highway over the railroad tracks in Doraville. And my parents had taken us by this old house many times, and I vaguely remembered it. I lived there till I was 4. But we actually passed that house on the way to this trailer park. And I remember crossing the railroad tracks, and I remember the entrance of that trailer park, and I remember seeing it as a younger child. And it was pretty dumpy and pretty run down. And so Bill, starts ringing the bell really quiet. And he was like, ding, da, ding, 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 da, ding, ding. And we kind of went in really, really slow. And he said, this is a one way, so you can't really come charging through here. He said, you have to kind of take your time and just really ring the bell and keep ringing it, and then you'll see what happens. And so he's sort of ringing it, and we're here, we kind of come, and I'm looking around, and I'm seeing like an old hound dog in a dirt hole under a trailer, under like an old dilapidated kind of staircase made out of wood, and lattice, and it was just real dingy, and a lot of stray dogs running around, and then it looked just really poverty stricken, and there'd be like a lot of different kind of toys, and little old bicycles and big wheels and hoppity horses and all these like kind of run down toys, and then all of a sudden it was like like if you slowed down time, and then you saw everything just stop, because these children, the minute their little ears heard that bell, it was like their nervous system became erratic, and they would like, wait, and they would begin to run, and it was like a panic set in. And these little children were darting all over the place. And he says, you got to be really careful, because they'll run out in front of you. And the kids were just chaotically running to go find a dime or a quarter or whatever. And, Bill showed me on the menu board that there was one little item that was a quarter. That was the least expensive thing on this ice cream board. And it was either a cherry or banana mini bomb, which was a baby popsicle. And he said 9 times out of 10, that's about all they can afford. But you never know. Sometimes they have $1, and sometimes you can get them to buy a couple of things. And I started feeling kind of weird, like get them to buy something. Like, I don't want to take their money at all. This is very scary and sad. Well, anyway, when the children approached, there was this little grouping, and finally he stopped the van, he put it in park, and he leaned out the window, and I was kind of, in my metal chair turned around, and the window was behind me, so he was sort of behind me, and he leaned out, and I saw his profile, and he was magical, and he started saying, "Hey, Jeremy, hey, Marcia," and he knew all their little names, and it was the most gentle spirit coming out of this guy. And the kids just were looking up at him like he was some sort of like Greek god or something, and he looked sort of Greek, and he had these chiseled out features, and he was witty and funny and sarcastic, and he'd look over at me with a grin and sometimes even wink. And I just kind of watched him throughout the day deal with these kids, and I finally started loosening up, and I was able to start handing out, and he'd say, hand him a push-up or hand him this, and I was sort of trying to help, and and I hadn't had anything to drink or smoke, so I was starting to get a little bit antsy, because I was on a regular day basis drinking alcohol. I mean, every night, usually, no matter what, I drank at least a 6-pack by then. And so I was getting a little antsy, but I would hang in there with him, and it was like he was like Robin Hood or the Pied Piper or something, and the little children, and they were mesmerized, and then we would pull away in the van and leave them. And I remember there was never a child left without some kind of little popsicle in their hand. And I don't know if he gave them all one. I mean, I was just kind of confused, like, who paid? Like, you didn't see a whole lot of money exchange, but we worked our way through this trailer park, and it was really a long, long trailer park. And I was like, Jesus, are we ever going to get out of here? And around 8 o'clock, he says, now we're going to head to what I call the gold mine. And he said, if you choose to take this route, and I felt like I was listening to that fucking Mission Impossible show where they used to say, if you choose to take this case or whatever. But he said, this place is the gold mine, and you'll see. And so I go, well, where are we going? And he looks over at me and he goes, Liberty Heights. And I had this like voice shoot through my mind of my mother saying, y'all quit acting like you're from Liberty Heights. That's all I knew about Liberty Heights. I didn't know what it was. Well, we start turning into this street. Now, remember, there was a gas station to the left, and there was this little old country kind of country looking grocery store on the right. And we pulled into the street, and he said, now listen, you have to ring the hell out of the bell when you enter this neighborhood. He said it'll echo down into the neighborhood. And the entrance of this place, there was no entrance sign. There was no sign that said Liberty Heights or anything. And it was just like a street. And we turn in, and he rings the hell out of the bell. I mean, it was shaking the van. And all of a sudden, you look down the street, and it's about 8 o'clock at night. And, it's kind of getting not really dark yet, but you see these droves of people start to come out to the ends of their driveways. And it was all these little row houses, and they were side by side by side by side all the way down. And there'd be like, refrigerators on the front porch and couches out on the street and abandoned cars. And then there'd be like a real nice yard, like a real manicured yard with a couple of ceramic chickens and the little garden art. There wasn't garden art back then, but that'd be like the extent of it. And, it was kind of like you could tell that at one point there'd probably been some upkeep in this neighborhood, and now it was sort of like, I'd say like slums, and all white people. I didn't see any African American people or any people from any other culture, but it was mostly just looked kind of poor, and just I couldn't believe how many people were coming out of their houses. And so we started working our way through this neighborhood. And he said, when you get to the end of the street, you do like a U-turn, you come back up another street, and there they would all be. Well, we didn't get out of that neighborhood till 11 o'clock at night. And I was exhausted. And I mean, I had broken down and eaten a couple of ice creams. I finally asked him, can I have ice cream? Because I was starving. He was like, yeah, that's fine. Eat all you want. You can eat all the ice cream you want. I'm like, oh, this is not going to be good for me because I love sugar. But anyway, we go on back to the ice cream shop, I'll call it, the headquarters. And we get there, we pull in, and there's all these other vans, just like his van. And I see these orange extension cords, and they're running out of the window. So apparently they're attached to their freezer, and they plug them into these posts. And that's what the pressure-treated posts with the electrical outlets were for. So all these vans are plugged in, and we pull up, and he pulls up to the front door. It's kind of like he's sort of higher up in the hierarchy of the people, it seems. And he says, hey, bring that chair with you. And I said, all right. So I get out, and we go in, and I put the metal chair back over where it was, where I found it. He goes, you can just wait there. So I sit in the chair, and he goes up to the window, and he's got this cigar box, and the cigar box has his money in it from the day. And he's sort of saying hey to everybody, and there's all these guys kind of gathered and congregated around, and they kind of reminded me of the guys that used to hang out in the smoking area in high school. They kind of had back then we called them like the freaks and the heads. And they had sort of not really mullet hairstyles, but kind of longer hair, and they wore several of them had on army field jackets. And so they were all kind of standing around. They all kind of looked at me, and I kind of looked at them, and nobody was real friendly. But Bill goes up to the Stevie Nicks girl, Chris, and turns his money. And I saw her take the cigar box, and she took the bills out, and she counted the bills like a damn banker. I mean, she was flipping through them really fast. And then she took the change, and she dumped it into this change counter, and it starts counting the change, and you could see a digital number coming up, I guess it was counting it down to the penny. And then she was counting real quick, and she had this cigarette in her mouth, and it was a really long cigarette. And I won't really say it was like a Virginia Slims because it wasn't a skinny cigarette. It was like a regular fat cigarette, but maybe like a Cool King or Kent King or something like that. But it was like the cigarette was almost like an appendage of her body. And she'd shake her bangs back because her hair sort of hung down in her eyes, but while she had the cigarette, she'd hold her head back and shake her head back, and the cigarette would be kind of up in the air, like hanging off her lip. She'd be talking to Bill at the same time. And then she counted some money back and gave it to him through the drawer, passed it back through to him, like at a bank teller. And he grabs the cash and kind of wads it up, puts it in his pocket. And he comes back over and he looks at me and he goes, "Well, you did real good today, and if you come back tomorrow, we'll make you an inventory sheet and we'll just get you started." And he starts kind of telling me what's going to happen if I come back. And I'm thinking, I don't think I'm going to come back. Like, I'm just already making up my mind. Like, this is bizarre and I just don't think I can do it. And then he says, and you don't really get paid on your first day, on your first training day, but you'll get paid on the first day you go out. And I was like, really? And I know I must have looked real disappointed. And he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a $20 bill and he goes, "Here, but I want to give you this for helping me out because you really helped me out today. And, you were real good with the kids and everything." And so he gives me $20 and I'm like, $20 for all of that, for that many hours? Oh my God. And so he's kind of talking to me, and then he turns around and he goes, "Uh-oh, here she comes." And all the guys are looking. They look out the front glass, and the headlights of one of the vans comes in, and it comes right up to the door, right beside where Bill's parked. And the lights turn off, and I look out, and I can see from the street lights of the outside of the building shining into this van, there's a female. And he looks at me and he says, "It's Regina." And I said, "Oh." And he said, "She's the queen of cream." And I went, "Oh, Lordy." And I thought to myself, the queen of cream, oh my God. And he said, "She's our top salesperson." I went, "Oh." And I looked at her, and she looked like she was gathering up like her belongings and looked like she was kind of getting some stuff. And then she glances up over the steering wheel, and I can see like there's something hanging from the mirror, the rear view mirror in her van. And it's a set of handcuffs. And I can see them sort of glimmering in that outside light that's shining off the building. And then she looks over the steering wheel right at me, kind of like, "Who are you?" And she's got kind of blonde hair, kind of dirty blonde hair, and kind of dark eye makeup. And, she's kind of attractive, but she looks serious. She looks like sort of a serious person. And so she gets out and she walks through the door and she walks right by me and she looks over at me and she goes, "Are you new?" And I said, "Yeah, I went out and trained today." And she goes, "Okay." She goes, "I'm Regina." And I said, "I'm Jill." So she goes up to the window and she turns in her money, and all the guys are over there kind of snickering. And you can tell they're kind of talking about her, and she's kind of got her hip cocked out. And, she's kind of got this edge to her. Like she's good looking, and she's kind of trashy. She reminded me of Ellen Barkin in that movie Sea of Love. She played a love interest of Al Pacino that wore this raincoat and exposed herself in a grocery store. And that scene kind of flashed through my mind. And so she turns around after getting her money. It looked like they gave her a big old chunk of money too. And she walks past me again. She goes, "Well, I guess I'll see you around." And I said, "Okay." She walks out and she gets in her van and she drives it over to a parking space and she plugs it in. And I'm just watching her from the metal chair. And then she goes over and she gets in this car. And it's a brand new Toyota Celica Supra with a sunroof, and it's kind of two-tone. It's sort of a brownish tone with a champagne tone. Really good looking car. And I'm like, damn. And I thought, did she make enough money to buy that car? And at that moment, that car made my decision to come back there the next day. I had no idea that when I had looked into that newspaper and I saw that little ad that said, "Need cash fast," it was as if my head merged into that newspaper like a looking glass. Sort of like Alice in Wonderland when she sort of like melted into the looking glass or morphed into the looking glass. It was as if my head sort of went into that newspaper and back out. I was stepping into something that was going to change my life drastically.
Hammered is recorded and produced in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. It's narrated by Jill Haynie, produced by Maggie Briggs and Jill Haynie, and with sound design, editing, and music by Alexander Rodriguez. Our beautiful artwork was created by Lauren Caddick, and we'd like to send a special thanks out there to Minnie and Robin. You can check out our website, podcasthammered.com, and follow us on social media for updates.